The state of college athletics is changing pretty rapidly. I've been covering Georgia for the last 5 years, and just in the time that I've been doing this job and being a part of college athletics and in a more insider capacity, things have just changed so much. What I don't think is going to change is the core of how Kirby Smart runs his football program and tries to construct his team. That's kind of been a topic that's been touched on, whether it was touched on really specifically or in kind of a way where he's alluding to it this spring football and transfer portal, right? What are the big changes? Transfer portal, NIL, those are the main ones, right? There's about to be a house settlement, right? There's legislation going on right now that might change the way that these players can get played. And Kirby thinks that the attitudes of players are changing. He's talking about how players are putting their hands up when they're receiving difficult coaching and how they're dealing with a little bit more of, and these aren't his words, but divas and entitlement, right? That's essentially what he's talking about. He's having to deal more with these young players. What he wants are, it's what he's been screaming at us about all spring practice. He wants compete. He wants people that compete really hard. He wants fire. He wants passion. And I think most of all, he wants people that love Georgia. And those qualities are what he looks for before he looks for how far can Garner Stockton throw the football, how fast can Nate Frazier run the ball. Those are the qualities they look for beforehand. I think that what Zachariah Branch, one of the transfer wide receivers, said kind of highlights, hey, Georgia's not the only place that's like this, but things are a little bit different at Georgia. And when you look at schools across the country who are really heavily relying on the transfer portal or relying on it more than Georgia, Oregon is an example, Florida State is an example. You see it in basketball, college basketball. Man, I feel like it's changing that sport a little bit more than it's changing football when you just see the roster turnover and the rosters are smaller, so it impacts it a little bit more. But man, Georgia's not going to change. And even if they have to dip into the transfer portal and go get guys, even though that's not Kirby's preference, he's not changing, hey, this is what they're looking for. I've got a quote from Zachariah Branch I want to talk about. I've got a quote from Kirby. I want to talk about Ryan Curley from Dawg Post. Let's get into what they had to say. Let's start with what Zachariah Branch had to say. This is a kid who is from out west, right? And he went to Bishop Gorman out in Nevada, which is a pretty big-time high school football program that does things a certain way and is very serious about winning. So he kind of already understands that concept. Well, he goes to USC. He goes to play for Lincoln Riley. He goes to play with Caleb Williams, right? Number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft last year, Heisman winner, very talented football player. And he goes to be a part of an offense that's supposed to be pretty pass-heavy. This is kind of a little bit out of context, but he's not super involved in that offense. Over his 2 years over there, he hits the transfer portal. This is what he had to say about that. A lot of things impacted me to come to the University of Georgia. First and foremost, the culture that Coach Kirby Smart and the coaching staff has established. I feel like it's a big brotherhood. It's not just words. Some people say, okay, you have to have the bond and the things like that to be a great team. But I really do believe that. They've built it into this program year after year. Just being surrounded by a lot of like-minded players and just trying to get towards the same goal is something that's really important to me as well. And I feel like once I got into the portal, it was pretty easy to make my decision from there. So that's what he said about choosing Georgia in the transfer portal. He didn't talk about, hey, I want to... Players can be honest, right? They're allowed to be honest with us. Was this about an NFL pipeline? Was this about, and USC is a pretty good pipeline for that. Was this about, wanting to live somewhere new, right? Players are typically pretty honest about why they went to certain places. Obviously, money is a factor. I don't know that was a factor in this, right? When Zachariah Branch, him and his brother picked Georgia, there was a report about how Kirby Smart is very savvy with the way that they spend money and how they spread the money around, and they're not giving these players huge dollar figures individually, maybe compared to some other programs. It's hard to know the real truth behind that. So based off reporting and based off of kind of what we know about Kirby in this program, I don't think that they just handed a big bag to Zachariah Branch and his brother Zion. I don't think that's how they got the Branch brothers to go to Georgia. This is about the culture and about winning and trying to become a better football player, and that's Look, that's what Kirby talks about all the time, and literally 3 or 4 different instances in the spring. We've talked to him I think it is 4 times, right? It doesn't matter if it was 3 or 4 times, but it's around that. It's how many times we've gotten to speak to him for about 15 to 20 minutes, and he just keeps harping on the fact that, look, football is changing. The sport is changing. They are not going to change that. What Kirby talks about over and over as well is he prefers to recruit out of high school. He prefers to get kids on campus while they're 17, 18 years old, get them to Georgia, and to build up from there. It's a big part of why they won back-to-back national championships, and that was built on that, and players that stuck around and players that developed under the Kirby Smart football program at Georgia. Well, it's not as easy to do that now when players move around, people are transferring out of your program. You need to hit the transfer portal yourself to maybe fill out a roster. Maybe there's just really good players with a lot of potential like Zachariah Branch on the market, and you say, hey, I got to go out there and get that. But Kirby would prefer, hey, to get the high school guys. And if you look at Georgia's most recent class, 25 to 27 high school recruits, and then somewhere between 5 and 8, these are rough numbers, somewhere between 5 and 8 transfers. They went mostly high school to build this roster. But he's not opposed to doing that if, one, they're players that are buying into this, like it sounds like Zachariah Branch is, and two, are pretty good football players that they think can help the team. That's kind of secondary in this conversation, is about how Branch is an explosive football player, is someone that, I'm not saying he's like a 1,000-yard receiver, but someone that you think will make an impact in this offense and be a weapon that Georgia didn't seem to have last year, right? And it's kind of lacking. And they were lacking a lot of things, but what he kind of brings to the table is something that I think that they struggled with. So Kirby was asked about how do you get the younger guys up to speed at practice when they're not, maybe they're just not getting it the way that the older players of Georgia do have been around for a couple of years. And he said, look, he doesn't want to be a motivator. And obviously, Kirby knows he's a pretty good motivator. He's one of the best coaches. And he said that someone asked him about that, and he said, well, I'd rather get the players that I don't have to motivate because they're self-motivated, right? He wants those Nolan Smith types of players, those Stetson Bennett types of players, Malachi Starks types of players that kind of just love Georgia and love winning and understand, hey, I might have to do this or I might have to do that. That's what he wants. He doesn't want to have to teach that as much. And I guess his concern is that those types of players are not as common as maybe they were even just a couple of years ago when they're 16, 15, and whoever big-time coach is going to their living room, and part of the conversation is a little bit about money and about what they bring to the table in terms of value. And so that conversation has changed a lot, but Kirby said, we're trying to find guys that have passion, fire, and like it matters to them. Like they want to compete and it matters to them. And he says they reward players for that. They get rewarded with playing time. They get rewarded with winning the job, whether it be special teams or a starter on offense and defense. I think that it's interesting, that he won't, we've talked, I think Dean and Matt and I talked this past week about how much does Kirby need to adjust what he's doing. I don't think he needs to adjust that much. Maybe with roster management, things will change, but in terms of the types of players you want to get and the types of ways that he's going to coach, I don't think that should change. They know how to win championships. They know how to win SEC championships. They know how to win these huge bowl games. They know how to go undefeated, right? A lot of that does have to do with the talent, but the other part is the process. That's not going to change. That's not going to change, and I think when you hear the way Zachariah Branch talks, and we're still waiting to speak with Noah Thomas. Hopefully we'll get to this week. Another player that I think could be an impactful transfer. What goes into your decision of picking Georgia? Because it's not this NFL wide receiver pipeline. So specifically for that position, it's an interesting choice. But it's about the culture and winning. And that part's not going to change Georgia. Thanks for watching.